Very good. We're live. Look at that. Look at that for timing or lack of there within. And yeah, I think we will wait for the main show to start, but we're all here. We can see and hear each other. For the pre-game, before this officially starts in 60 seconds, Alex, coming to you for High Rocks.
Just coming straight for High Rocks. Going live.
I'm just coming straight
live
for
from
you.
High Rocks.
You know.
Yeah, completed it on the weekend. Good time. The kids were there supporting on every lap, which made it really special. And it was in my hometown, back in Manchester. So yeah, all in all, a good weekend. And I've heard, just because we're now live to everybody, that you're already signed up for one this year.
Well, this is it. This is it. The race is on, buddy. The race is on. I think you've got a couple of edges on me, but I'm coming for your crown. I'm coming for your crown. I don't think I'll look quite as trim as all of your other contestants that I saw on that post, but you know, there we go. You can but aim for these heights, can't you? But we are live, and we're expecting a big crowd today. I think over 200 people are signed up. So rather than kind of hanging around, we can definitely start to get things moving. Let's go round, get some introductions. It's the formal start time at 3 o'clock. I can see people in the comments already. And so coming to you for clarity, Claire, great to get an introduction from you.
Hi, I'm Claire de Souza. I co-founded a global employer brand community called the EB Space, and I also lead employer branding at a big retailer in the UK, that's Orange. Go figure.
You got a guess. Everyone's got a guess in the comments.
Yeah, there'll be prizes for first, second, and third place for fastest figure first. There we go. No LinkedIn searching to cheat. Charu, let's go to you next.
I'm Charu M. I have worked in global employer branding leadership roles for the last 10 years, organisations like Ayin, McKinsey, and so on. And I am an employer branding consultant. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Lovely. And you gave us like a quick 360 flip as well with the camera just at the start of that as well, which was quite impressive. I watched it play back slightly slower on my other screen.
The smoke starts in a moment as well.
Yeah, and the light show. We've got to get it all going. We did say we'd have entrance music, so I'm sorry that we don't today, but we will definitely work on that for the future. And then Alex, outside of High Rocks, do you want to share with what you do?
I can't believe that's how you've just introduced me on here, but I'm going to roll with it. I'm the growth director at Wiser. So Wiser are an employer branding and early talent agency. So we work with Charu in the past and lots of clients on how they build an early talent value proposition, how they go to market, how they then run recruitment marketing campaigns to attract and retain the best talent in the organization. So really looking forward to this conversation today.
Yeah, and huge. And obviously we all met up beforehand and thought about what we could talk about. And the list was frankly endless. And given the kind of powerhouse trio that we've got on this call today that I have the pleasure of hosting, that's unsurprising. But I'm just going to go straight there and I'm just going to canvas it out. We have to start with AI and then maybe see what we've got space for afterwards, because it is the one area right now in the world where even though hype is everywhere, it is actually exceeded by the reality, in my opinion, beyond where the hype is at the moment. And every week seems to be an absolutely game-changing stock market transforming moment. So I don't know who wants to kick us off, but I'd love to think about, I suppose, things that we're doing first and foremost, things that we started to experiment with, how are we using it at the moment before we get into the what does it mean for the future, which we invariably have to go to. So I don't know who wants to kick us off. Let's leave this open floor.
I'm happy to kick us off.
Let's go. Let's get some clarity on how we can use AI right now.
I think there's loads of tools, and there's loads of tools that are really great for enhancing your employer brand strategy. So there's some which look at your content, so which can help generate content. I think there's a really nice piece around accessibility. So for example, where it helps you write things, if you're a person who maybe struggles to write things or writing's a bit of a barrier, it can really help unlock that. I think there's still a bit of a health warning in terms of not using it so much that you become dependent on it. So, you can go onto LinkedIn and you can see the posts which are completely AI written and generated, and actually just remembering to retain your own voice and your own sense of personality. there's been some funny things I've seen, like with images. I don't think imagery is quite there yet, but actually the fact that it's going down that route is exciting. But I think it's also the balance between, okay, how do you still keep authentic, but using AI? And I'm not a fan of like authenticity as a word all the time. I think it's very overused, but I think in relation to AI, it's really important because it's the balance between relying on it and being over reliant on it. And actually, how do you use it as a tool that can enhance like what you're doing and streamline it, and even use it as a tool to help when you've got less resource versus just using it all the time.
And I think there's definitely a part there of like the artisanal effect of doing something that still feels innately human for humans to connect with it, as opposed to moving things the other way around. I think on that creative piece, it's going to be fascinating what actually transcends and happens. I don't know, Alex, if you want to shed some light on the like creative side, so outside of writing, actual visual creation, you've done some experimentation there.
Yeah, and we've also used AI from a tone of voice perspective, because we'll build out a brand's guidelines, what they sound like online. And so once you've got that asset, you can then run any piece of copy that you then produce through that to make sure that you are sounding consistent across whether it's a career site piece of copy or a social media post. So I think that's really important. Once you've spent all that time and money and worked with an agency potentially to build it out, it's like, how can you make sure that then is consistent across all the different members of TA and other parts of the organization? I think also using it as a test for removing biases. So when you think about job descriptions, you think about what's going on a career site job listing post, how can you make sure that you're not putting your biases across in some of the language that may be used, which might prevent some of the best candidates coming forward for the job? I think that's really important. And then when you're building out your team, because we can't just rely on the AI and the tech, we need the human element, like Claire said. So making sure you have a diverse range of people from different backgrounds that have different personality types that can then all add into how you then use it as a collective, I think is an important sense check for you always to have on a day-to-day basis. So there are like a couple of the things which I think immediately come to mind and how we are using it on a regular basis.
And I think that last piece there on like AGI, almost that idea of having like the tool going off and making those decisions and creating that part without the human intervention. We're certainly not there. And even when we get there, when it's something as important as your brand and your message, you need that human control, but also that human influence, which I think was a really key part there of like individuals bringing their own perspectives to it and contextualizing it. So yeah, I think key.
Yeah. And also a good way to think about AI is to look at what do you do repetitively manually. So whether that's onboarding, whether that's an email that goes out post someone applying, and just think about how could that then streamline that process? How could a chatbot then add or personalize some information based on who that candidate is, what source channel they came from, what their background is? That if you do that manually and someone has to think about that as a human being, it will take a lot of time, whereas you can program AI to do a lot of that heavy lifting for you. So that's just also another good way to think about it.
Definitely that reporting point. Charu, you look like you want to come in there as well.
No, I think, Claire and Alex have made some really valid points. And I think where I've seen the most benefit, certainly to my own work, is from an EVP perspective, the analysis and collection and distillation of things like interviews with focus group participants, with stakeholder managers, with senior leaders who don't have the time to spend hours with you, nor do you have the weeks upon weeks that we used to have for an EVP. Certainly the last project I did, the entire leadership interview set was being done and analysed 10x shorter because of the tools that I was using with my agency, and that in itself is a great thing. Because as a agency, as a function, we often go into an EVP project with very long timelines, which often stakeholders don't like the sound of. So I think from a analysis perspective, shortening those timeframes without any impact on the how is really a massive positive.
And like your EVP is now such a living beast, right? It's not the case of what it was before of maybe a 2-year refresh where you're coming back around. It's like a constantly iterative process, and like the setup and exactly like you're saying, being able to condense and compile that information and distill it so quickly to then be able to stay ahead is critical. And I think it's almost like the teams that aren't using this to augment what they're doing are just not going to be able to roll out at the same pace. Another kind of segue on that AI theme, and be interesting, I suppose, from like all perspectives really, is then AI in the hands of candidates. I think this has been well trodden enough, but it's certainly not going away in terms of those volumes of applications, hugely irrelevant, particularly for like non-skilled or roles which have fewer skills attached to them. So like you wouldn't have a library of bullet points that are attached to a more senior position. Entry-level positions could be, particularly hit by this, disproportionately. That's often been one of the big drivers of we've run a successful talent marketing campaign, right? We have generated X number of applications. So what do we think now in terms of KPIs for today, KPIs for the future in the context of the market as it is? Let's flip it round. Charu, where do you see KPIs today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably challenge what you said just slightly, because I've certainly not had targets on number of applications, and maybe just semantics. It's been qualified applications, because you can waste an awful lot of money, and we've all been there, getting the wrong people apply to your roles. And certainly when I've worked with people like Alex and his team in a previous role, actually making sure that we're spending our money wisely and getting the number of applications down. I do think TA as a function, as roles, are at a real crossroads. I think it's how are candidates using AI, but how we as EB and TA measuring ourselves, that they are massive changes. I think there's something around, yes, numbers are critical, ROI, but I think also that whole of the employer brand and the experience has changed, where we were doing everything programmatically and digitally, and that's obviously where our AI comes in hugely. But I see, and this is one of the trends, we're going to be doing things more humanly. So actually, how do you do the ROI of a great meetup, of a community kind of session, and so on? So probably not answering your questions with a list of our KPIs, Sam, but I certainly think if TA at a massive crossroads, and do we serve TA with numbers, or do we look at this much more holistically? And I think that's where we need to go, because we are about the brand experience and not just recruitment attraction anymore. I think that's where we need to be thinking much more smartly.
Yeah, and agreed on the qualified applications. I bet in the RADs tomorrow, though, some of those campaigns will have touched on the number of applications they got, the impressions, the visibility, all of that stuff. So it's definitely been a big part of like campaigns from an external perspective, as I've seen it today. But I think, you've touched it perfectly there. Alex, I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, the way I would always think about this, even before you get into the weeds of a campaign, is to separate the jobs into two categories. The two are impact, so how important is that role to your business? And the second is scarcity, so how rare are the necessary skills? How rare are they? How easy to find are they? So someone that has low impact or a low scarcity job might be, say, like an office clerk, or someone that's relatively easy to find, where you could put out an Indeed job ad and you can find them. Whereas someone that's high impact, high scarcity, like a CEO or a neurosurgeon, you're going to have to really work much harder from a marketing perspective to influence that human being to want to come and work for you. So think about that, the matrix of that. So scarcity on one side, and then impact on the other. And then I'd always think about because traditional job descriptions, I think, are an outdated method, because it asks you for a set of skills or things which someone has already previously done. Whereas ideally, if you can flip that on its head and turn it into a performance profile, so what tasks is this person going to be doing in the organization? That's a better way to think about it, because then you can start to then put that messaging in your copy and any of the creative, the recruitment marketing campaigns. But more importantly, you're finding someone that might not have that background, but they do have that skill set that can come in and do a really good job. And so then looking at, taking it one step further, then once you've got those high or the qualified candidates in the pipeline, how can you test that they can really come in and do those skills, rather than basing it on what they've done previously? I think that's a really strong way to look at it. And the best story I've ever heard of this is, I don't know if you know the guys who created WhatsApp. That they came to Facebook, they applied to Facebook, Brian and Jan, I think it was in about 5 years before they then sold to Facebook for 19 billion. And Facebook said, no, because you don't have the qualifications and you don't have anything historically to show us, even though they were some of the best, engineers and visionaries of their time, we can't bring you on. The hiring team, recruitment team said no. And then fast forward 5 years and they sold the company back to them for 19 billion. So it's just thinking in that way and approaching your recruitment, I think, is a really important thought process before you even get into how you use AI and all the things which you mentioned at the beginning.
I think to build on what Alex has said, though, it's not just about the level of role. So, use office app manager, certainly, when I worked in retail, Primark and so on, perhaps some of the roles weren't the highest paid, but if at Christmas or, peak hiring season, you couldn't find the staff to actually be on the shop floor and so on, they were important roles. So those requisitions not being filled were as critical as the CEO or the CMO. So I think, this is where the EB and the TA teams boundaries and lines come in terms of a campaign can only do so much, how quickly, how much at pace are the TA team qualifying, how quickly are they assessing, and so yeah. But I just wanted to build on what Alex was saying there.
I hope everybody's safe. That sounded like a really dangerous alarm. I genuinely was on a call last week and the fire alarm went off and I was like, no, it's just a fire alarm. But it was a genuine fire. So I had to leave the building there and then. So yeah, luckily that wasn't it. Hopefully everyone's safe on this call. I saw you came off mute there.
I'm just going to add, I think when you're looking at your KPIs, especially across recruitment and building on both what Alex and Charu have said, I think it's looking at how it can help things like, for example, time to hire, looking at your actual processes. So how can it pull out key skills, right? So there's a lot of talk about CVs and CVs being dead, but actually a lot of organizations still look at your CV. And to Alex, to your point, they also look at what experience do you have, what qualifications do you have, when actually a lot of people who are extraordinarily successful haven't gone to university. They haven't got this, written education that people say they need to have, but they do have the skills. And I think when you're looking at, your actual time to hire, time to fill roles, how you can streamline like particularly clunky processes, that's where AI can be really useful. So whether it's pulling out your key skills, helping you write like a really relevant job advert, I think it's how can it help you move your process quicker, and actually then you can focus on the things that really matter. So I think it can play a part in your KPIs, but I think how you weave it in as an extra tool, as an extra helping hand, how it can take off some of that heavy lifting and shifting, and just looking at different ways you can utilize it rather than saying AI is going to fix all my problems. It can enhance like how you can build a solution to something.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I think the volume of input's just going to increase there, right? Would be regardless of whether it's on the candidate side or whether it's on the employer side, the amount of noise is going to increase. And then at the moment, there's over 400 tools that allow candidates to apply automatically for positions. So then, Alex, you can do that great work, exactly like you're talking about, crafting the job description, doing that piece. And of course, there's still going to be some candidates that are building that brand affinity, that are applying organically and naturally. But then as like agentic workflows become more mainstream, we've already seen operator, in the US, we're inevitably going to see it within our own Google suites. It's like, well, how are we actually serving adverts to be picked up by agents to do that application on people's behalf, who are then thinking about that with their day-to-day workflow, which I think is like a fascinating next stage of what it does. Does this mean that, because Charu, I think you touched on ROI for more physical meetups. Do you think we're going to see more physical activations of employer brand to kind of counteract this noise? Is that anybody exploring that at the moment? Out of home campaigns, kind of a bit of a return to physical media?
Yeah, definitely. So we have an academy which is comprised of around 230 students across 71 universities in the UK. And when it comes to any early talent campaigns, they are still some of the most efficient performing channels which we have, because people trust people at the end of the day. And despite them also having a huge social following so they can get the message out there, for us, it's knowing someone on your campus or in your society that also understands the company, understands the purpose, and can articulate that to you as a student way better than I can as like a 33-year-old. They'll be able to talk in the same language as they will. And so I think thinking about not just from a student marketing perspective, but just in general, if you're trying to speak to engineers or marketeers, or how can you activate your employees who are from that group and who understand the language they use and the communities they're going to spend their time in, and what are they then going to say? So what does your employer brand message say? How do they articulate that? And often people feel a bit unsure of how you say that. So you need to train them, you need to give them not permission, but just showcase that you can be a bit more authentic, or showcase or talk about these topics, especially if historically your company has not allowed people to. because ultimately that's going to be some of the most influential and the best candidates will come from that referral network or those communities which your people will be in.
Yeah, and I certainly have been not just experimenting, but seeing huge success, especially with some engineers and digital talent. I think from an employer branding perspective, though, this is where our education piece comes in, because it's often a longer tail, it's a longer process. And certainly, getting engineers, people in the digital space, designers as well, talking to other designers without I've got a job, go and talk to my TA colleague, is where the kind of the magic is. And that alchemy starts where you're trusted internally to go, okay, have a series of events talking about what it's like to be this type of role. How do you progress, without expecting someone to apply tomorrow? But you may get a referral, you may get somebody going, okay, after a year. So not expecting instantaneous ROI. And I think we are going to see a lot more back to physical events becoming as prominent as they were perhaps pre-COVID, simply because things like trust are being really eroded. If you look at this year's Edelman Trust Index results, how we as people, not just employees, see society and governments and organisations, i.e. the CEOs, the CFOs, the CMOs, we are hugely cynical towards those. So actually having an engineer talking about why he works there or why she works there is going to be critical. So yeah, seeing it, experimenting with it, and having massive success, not just against early careers.
Yeah, and you're hearing this, listeners, in person is returning. I was speaking to an events organizer today, incidentally, and there's definitely a lot of hunger and determination to be there in person and break through the noise and break through the echo chamber. And Claire, interested for your thoughts as well, like out of home, is it back in vogue? We're going to see this accelerating.
I think one of the connections I think that's often overlooked is forgetting how many hats your candidate wears. So, for example, if you're a consumer business, they're either going to have brand affinity to you as a consumer or they won't. Or if you're a B2B business, they're going to buy into you as a business. I think it's how do you meet candidates where they're at. So like one of the biggest campaigns we've run across the year uses no AI really whatsoever. It's based on physical collateral, and we attract candidates into roles. And we're looking, we're attracting, thousands, hundreds of thousands of candidates into these particular roles. I think there's something to be said about the relationships that you actually have with a brand, regardless of whether it's your employer brand or consumer brand. It's simply the brand itself, and how you can use AI to support that. I think with enhancing things like with stories, so what people's actual experiences is one thing and really important. But I think also if you've got a strong consumer brand or a strong brand that's out there in the market, you've got to do a bit more work, especially if you've got a brand that might have a lot of press attention and people will have like just set opinions of it. How can you counteract that with different stories and get people to think, okay, I might not be a customer here, but actually I want to work here. And I think there's a strong piece around it. I think in person is really important. I think it's the face-to-face interaction is probably coming back and it's not going anywhere. But I think where AI can, take a lot of that lifting and shifting, I think there's also a bit of fatigue sometimes of keeping everything online all the time. I think there is something really valuable about in-person connections and actually meeting people in real life. Like when you're having an interview, yes, you might do it all online, but actually you're still going to meet someone in person. I think that's really valuable, and I don't see that going anywhere like straight away. And you can see it with companies as well, like that, when you're taking away more hybrid working and saying you have to go into the office. I'm not saying I agree with that, but when I've talked to different people, even if they're doing something where they're in the office once a week, they really value that in-person human connection with their teams. And I think that's really important of where you keep the balance.
Yeah, and I think you've also got to augment a bit as well, right? I think sometimes when you're doing an out-of-home campaign, you can be a lot more targeted with your research and when you're thinking about doing it and what the measurable, the results, etc. Like a great example I've got a B2B lead generation company that's been messaging me for months and months and months and months and months, and I've not responded. And so then they took the time to send a physical letter, and they followed up and said, we sent a physical letter to your office, but they hadn't taken the time to let a system or themselves check that was our old office address. So they missed that physical interaction. They spent that extra time. They tried to create that like experience. And I think that's the same here. Like clear that that like hunger for human connection, that hunger to connect again is going to be there, and it helps cut through the noise. But we need to be pragmatic and augment that so that it's accurate and that we're reporting that data and we can play it back in the right kind of way. Alex, I think you got a point on this. I can tell you're kind of just coming in.
Just when Claire was talking there, because I always think about the M&M, not the wrapper framework, which is can you make it meaningful and can you make it memorable? And if you were to say, we talked about metrics earlier, so just take job acceptance rates in a competitive market, they're around 70%. So it doesn't stop when the candidate applies and they go through that process, you offer them the job. How can you then make it personal or memorable or meaningful to get that acceptance rate to go higher? And some of the best examples that we've seen, if you look at the Spotify campaign, when they would create the We Need You playlist, don't know if you've ever seen any of them. And it's like the playlist, and it almost spells out, it's like different songs, they spells out something specific to that candidate. It's authentic to them, uses their product, it's meaningful, shows they've spent that extra bit of time, like you're saying, Sam, like to get to know them. But it's also clever, it's like memorable, it's remarkable. You tell your friend in the gym or, you know, after work. So always try and think, is this meaningful? Is this memorable? And that will help, I think, with a lot of these things, whether it's a marketing campaign or onboarding. Those two M&Ms, not the wrapper, that will really help.
M&M also, you know, if you need other M&Ms, there's also that clothing brand. I can't remember what it was. M&M Direct, that catalog thing.
Also,
back in the day.
Also the sweets, you know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's slightly better brand recognition. I'm just keeping it real, the friends at M&M Direct. And like final few minutes, and I think we kind of like touched on it a little bit there as well. And one of the things which I'll like kind of get people to talk about until I'm blue in the face is how we replay back the activities of talent acquisition to the business to offer strategic value and commercial impact. And there's no shying away from the fact that talent marketing budgets, EB budgets, attraction budgets have seen a decrease in recent years. And how do we shift it from a nice to have, hey, maybe we'll do a refresh, okay, there feels like there's a good business case here, to this is a strategic priority to us because of X. And I do believe that we're in a better position now from a data maturity position to do that on an ongoing basis. But yeah, keen, I'm going to throw it out there. How do we move from nice to have to this needs to be on all the time regardless? This is tied to the budget every year. Big topic. Who's going first? Claire's going to bring us some clarity. I can see it.
Start with the clarity.
I blame Alex. Her, not Alex.
I think you have to tie it into your business goals. I think it's your biggest win, and too often it's probably overlooked. You might go into an organization and go, I really want to do an EVP or I want to do colleague advocacy. But if your business and the goals your business has just isn't aligned for it, is not ready for it, then don't do it. I think you really have to listen to what your business wants. And the more you do that, the more you find solutions and things at that time of your business strategy, the more employer brand becomes a need to have rather than a nice to have. And the more you become an actual piece of the puzzle. And if you're not there, it's missing and it's not complete rather than an add-on. And I think it's something that feels small when I'm saying it, but actually in practice, most people, and even in my earlier career, you go and you think you're an island, that you've got to do all this stuff, but actually, are you really listening to what your business is doing, your changing business strategy, or like the changing like dynamic of the market, like just not the talent market, but actually the market that your business operates in? How do you move with those changes? How do you get ahead of that? How do you become really proactive? How do you build strong relationships with your stakeholders that are not just transactional and solve a problem, but actually it's much wider than that, but you're listening to people all year round. So when someone's coming to you, you're like, actually, I've got something that can really help you. And it's not I'm going to do this, fill my role because it's really important. It's actually, hey, recruitment's on my agenda and it's on my agenda all the time. But what are things that we can do to maybe enhance profiles, maybe enhance what we're doing as a team, as a business? So when we get around to hiring again, we have something concrete and we've built up everything in between. But I think the biggest win is definitely aligning it to your business strategy. And that also will increase your budget because you're saying, I'm a need to have, I must be here. And it means that people in the business will invest in you.
Powerful. Great point. I think any great business usually comes down to three things: is a great idea or product, service, a little bit of money to keep it going, and then the people, like really exceptional talent to then drive the business forward, create new opportunities, innovate. And when, I'll never forget when they asked Steve Jobs in that famous interview, they said, well, what's the best product you've ever built? And he said, my team. And I thought, that's interesting, especially for someone who he wasn't a great people manager or anything, but that's, even with that background and context, he still saw the importance of people, team, high performance across the organization. And they really doubled down and focused on it. And that's why they're one of the most successful companies in the world. So then when you take it that next level, it's like, well, if you want to build one of the best companies in the industry, you need high performing people. They're usually in a job, number one. And number two, they don't always move for money. So then your employer brand and what you stand for and the purpose and the projects and everything else that you put into that can be the differentiator, just to open that door so that you can at least get a conversation with that person. And that 1 or 2, 3 or 4 people, depending on the size of your company, could literally change the direction or the future of your business. And so when you operate and give that kind of framing to different people, like Claire said, really relating it to the business goals of the company, you can then start to see the importance of employer branding, your EVP, your messaging. And it's why we created a tool called Wisdom to analyze what people externally thought about different employer brands. So I come from the consumer marketing world before I came into employer branding. And we would always find out what people thought of the product, whether it's like Apple headphones, Nike trainers, because then that's important, because then you know then how can you frame your offering in comparison to what other people are thinking, and also what their motivators are for moving, especially if money's not always the primary one. What are those other ones which you can really delve into? And that's why Wisdom has been important for us, because then it gives us that information. Myself and the marketing team can go away and then create something which is going to resonate with that talent group.
Yeah. And subtle plug, just for anybody watching, if you want some of that insights, definitely check out Wisdom. If you want some stuff specific for tech as well, drop us a note. That was going to be the call to action at the end of this for what AI talent want in their next role. We've got a good report on that to share with you. Charu, let's wrap it at the end here. Why must it be a must-have for every organization?
Yeah, I think us positioning ourselves as being much less about transaction and just solely about attraction is going to be key. So, so much data is out there, absorbing that, talking about that internally to people outside of HR to solve problems that are already existing and bubbling around is going to be critical. So I think, pivoting and not just thinking about attraction as being part of our role. And even, I'm not talking about the job description, but being interested in solving those problems. But I also think there's something around, if we can really understand how people outside of HR, EB work in internal comms, external comms, employee engagement, we're probably working on things and being aware of things that can help solve their problems. Sharing budget, going to the CPO with a unified approach is always a massive kind of game changer. And in my experience, if you can show that you're working across the employee experience, you're seen as a much more holistic solution versus here's a campaign and you've done it. Okay, I don't need to give you any money until the next season. So yeah, there's kind of mighty builds.
Yeah, and an organization is its people, that like internal comms, the internal message that your employer brand does. We could have done another half an hour on that alone, and I think absolutely crucial. And I think my challenge to the people that have stayed watching, and challenge to everyone in the industry, is for employer brand, for so many years, everybody just instantly references and says, well, Virgin Media showed how changing the perception as a consumer brand generated additional revenue for their business. There's our business case for it. And I think there's so much truth in it, but how many organizations have then taken that path, evidenced that back in a really clearly articulated way? I want to see more of those case studies. Mm-hmm. And then there's all of that internal piece, absolutely crucial, tied to the business objectives. How do you contribute towards that? Of course, there's like some direct revenue attribution as part of that. But I like the idea of, a creative campaign as focused on the candidates' experiences, or also the customers. And it's like such a great narrative, but I've not seen that played back enough times. I've not seen that many case studies that said we've impacted this. And I think it's easier to do now than it ever has been before in terms of capturing and condensing that information playing it back. A huge thank you to 3 awesome guests with loads of incredible experience and insights. Every person pretty much who joined has stayed throughout, and it will definitely be due to the interesting insights that you brought, so thank you. But we will close the show here, keeping it short and sweet. But yeah, thank you all 3 of you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Sam.
Take care. Bye.